Christopher Wanless bought the 16.5-hectare wooded property and was happy to have so much space to himself. He decided to walk around his huge property on that fateful day. Christopher started walking down the path toward what he thought he had seen when he reached the top of the hill. He was so excited and a little scared that he didn't pay attention to where he was putting his feet. Then he looked ahead and saw it. He was confused, so he looked at the opening. It looked like an old abandoned mine that hadn't been touched in a very long time. At the entrance to the mine, Christopher could see what looked like moss on the walls, but once inside, it was completely dark. He was so interested in the mystery in his own backyard that he ran back to the house to get a flashlight. As he walked down the dark passage, the damp old walls seemed like they would fall on him at any moment. Christopher started to realize that a huge amount of soil was pressing down on him from above. Because he planned to be down here for a long time, he brought 3 extra batteries for his flashlight. He looked at the walls more closely and saw that, yes, they did shine. He joked that it might be gold, but he quickly put that thought out of his mind when he saw something that could soon change the mood of his fun trip. He saw right away that each of his footprints left a 4-inch hole in the mud. Water was coming from somewhere, and it was pooling into puddles that looked like they were moving. There was no sign that the water was standing still. This is a good sign because underground pools of still water can release dangerous gases when they are moved. He then turned on his flashlight and looked straight ahead, but he couldn't see the end of the tunnel. Suddenly, sounds came from behind and started to echo through the tunnel. He decided to go where the noise was coming from, but he didn't know he'd just made a mistake. Christopher kept going down the path, but there was no light in the tunnel. He heard the sound again, and this time it was even louder. It sounded like machinery and rusty metal scraping against each other. He was all around him water and decay, and each step he took made his boots sink deeper into the mud. He then saw that someone had put in an old yellow ventilation system that was falling apart at the seams. Low and close together, there were chains that were rusting and growing mold at the same time. Christopher had gone about 150 feet into the tunnel before he turned around and saw the light from the entrance. He didn't move for a few seconds until his body did something which made him jump. His nails scratched the walls, and his fear of being trapped closed in on him like a box lid. One of the chains started to move, and not just a little bit. It moved strongly, as if it were being moved by an invisible force. He knew someone was watching him, and he started to run back to the entrance. His heart started to pound in his chest. He ran all the way back home, and as soon as he got there, he grabbed his phone and called his real estate agent. He then told them what he had found on the walls of the mine, a sparkly substance that seemed to give off its own light in the small dark tunnel. The agent told him that someone was coming to look at the strange mine. Christopher hung up the phone and felt a huge sense of relief, all the way from his toes to his ears. After he hung up the phone, Christopher stood still in his kitchen as the lights began to flicker. He breathed quickly as he held his fear in his chest. The flickering lights gave him a strobe-like look at his kitchen, but then it went dark. He stumbled to the switch and started moving it up and down. Then he quickly turned the flashlight on and pointed it at the thermostat. He saw that the temperature had dropped a lot, and his breath made a cloud in front of his face. He pointed the light beam at the circuit breaker, and everything seemed to be fine. Everything was where it should have been, and it didn't look like the main fuse had blown. Then he went back up the stairs to get a glass of cold water to help him calm down, but the doorbell rang. The man at the door introduced himself as Mr. Rudall and said that the real estate agent had called him because of what Christopher had found on the land. Christopher showed him how to get to the mine and told him to be careful. They both turned on their flashlights when they got to the mine. When Mr. Rudall looked at the stone walls inside the mine, he couldn't help but laugh. He turned to Christopher, but all of a sudden, he felt something in the mine was trying to tell him something. Rudall starts to tell Christopher that the mine is, in fact, a long-abandoned gold mine, which is a surprise. He could tell from looking at the walls that there was still gold in the stone, which meant that the miners hadn't been able to finish their work and had left the mine. As he said that, something terrible must have happened for all that gold to be untouched. His eyes kept getting bigger and bigger. Christopher got all the courage he could to go deeper into the mine, but he was thinking of two things. The mine might have gold inside, but it might also be haunted. When he went into the mine the last time, he could only go 150 feet, but this time he knew he had to make it to the end no matter what. The answers he was looking for would only come to him then. As the light behind him went out, he kept going. He got to 600 feet before he figured out where the water was coming from. Then he noticed a door. Inside the door, he touched the wall and noticed that it was rougher and colder than the walls outside this strange room. There was a big pile of broken things in the middle of the room. He then went over to the mysterious hole in the wall, but he was disappointed to find that it was empty. He used his flashlight to look inside the hiding place and saw some strange white scratches. When he looked more closely, he saw that they were parallel lines that had been cut 4 at a time. The scratches were just on the surface, but they left a mark on the cement. When he turned around, he saw more marks on the opposite wall, but these were words, not vertical lines, and he couldn't figure out what they said. He took out his camera and took a picture of the message so he could look at it again later. He heard a noise behind him all of a sudden. He wildly waved his flashlight in the direction of the noise, but he didn't find anything. Then he heard a sound like metal scraping against metal, and a whisper of cold air blew over his shoulder. As he ran and ran, shivers went down his spine, and he could feel his blood getting colder in his veins. When he finally got out of the mine, he fell to the ground and grabbed his chest. He knew that a gold mine would be too good to be true. He got up and ran through the woods all the way to his house. There was a stillness in the air that seemed to muffle the sound of his footsteps, and even the trees seemed ready for what was to come. He ran faster than he had ever run before. When he got home, he went straight to his study and locked the door behind him. He typed "haunted mines" into Google and waited with bated breath for the results to load. The whispering stopped all at once. As the temperature dropped, he could only hear his own heavy breathing. The Google search finally came up, and the first result said, "You have to face the paranormal activity in the mind and in your life if you want to get rid of it." When he got to the kitchen, a soft whirring sound startled him. It came from the camera he was using. He picked it up and was confused. He was sure he turned it off as soon as he got into his house. Then he went back to look at the pictures he'd taken, but they were all gone. Christopher got as brave as he could before going into the mine for a third time. Even though he had run out of the black passage twice, it seemed darker than before. He walked through the water puddles until a cold wind hit him in the face. He shakes from the impact, but then he hears the sound of metal screeching again. His feet led him through the dark tunnel, but his body stopped all of a sudden. The noise was so loud and close that it hurt his ears. The rusty chains hanging from the rock ceiling of the tunnel began to move in a way that looked like they were dancing. He was so mesmerized by what he was seeing that he couldn't even begin to understand the sound of water moving. As his eyes started to focus, he saw it. A tidal wave of water rushing toward him. Christopher ran out of the gold mine into what he thought would save him. He was confused as he looked back one last time. There wasn't a wall of water coming at him, and there wasn't even any water. At the front door, there was not a single puddle. Then he walked through the dark woods until he saw his kitchen light shining. As soon as he opened the door, he knew his house was empty. Since nobody had been here, he must have turned on the lights himself. He shuffled to his kitchen, but he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened that day. He was sitting quietly in his study chair when he decided to turn on his computer. He opened the search engine and started typing, but then there was nothing on the screen. Christopher looked at the screen and couldn't believe that he was now dead. His eyes were full of tears. Christopher was tired both mentally and physically. He felt like the whole day had worn him out. He cupped his hands around his face, and all of a sudden felt like something was pulling at his feet like a magnet. He fell to the ground as he fell backward. Then he chose what to do. He needed to get out of there and find help. He had read that toxic gases could cause people to have hallucinations that looked like ghosts. Maybe the water in the mine was still and smelly because it wasn't moving. He got in his car and drove to the closest coffee shop. Christopher ordered a double espresso. While he waited, he opened a search engine on his phone and quickly typed, "Best parapsychologist near me," half expecting this screen to go dark too. And he was surprised to find that 2 different places were close by and fit what he was looking for. He got into his car and followed the directions until Google Maps told him he was there. The big purple sign that said Tarot Readings caught his eye right away. As he walked in, a bell rang to let everyone know he was there. A woman dressed in purple silk came out of the back. As she began to chant, the smell of the incense was very strong. Christopher fell asleep to the song because it sounded like something he had heard before. Then he remembered where he had heard that song. The noise he heard in the gold mine was like the song she was singing, but it was more melodic. He opened his eyes, ran out the door, jumped in his car, and drove away as fast as he could. He kept driving and didn't stop until he got to his mother's house. Then he put his new property up for sale. The real estate agents tried to get in touch with him, but he had left his mother in charge of the estate. But there are still things that don't make sense. Did Christopher really see something out of the ordinary on his land? Was there really a ghost in the mine? So this was all about the video. And if you liked today's video, then do check out more videos like this on our channel. Also, do subscribe to our channel and hit the like button for more updates.